The Dane and Derek Show is an uncensored, unfiltered podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Okay, all right, let's do this.
Let's do this.
Alrighty, before we get into this week's episode, I would like to thank our sponsor, Nicholas Greenlee.
Nicholas!
We love you, Nick. Thank you so much.
We love you so much.
Our sponsor and or tech czar.
Yeah, tech czar Nicholas Greenlee, Skyrim enthusiast Nicholas Greenlee, dog dude Nicholas Greenlee.
That's nicholas.greenlee at helpmemymicrophoneisfucked.com.
Yeah, we love you, Nick. Thank you.
Yay!
All right, everybody, here's the show. All right. Welcome back to the Dane and Derek Show, everyone. I'm Derek, and yeah, this is a show where we talk about Taylor's incredible fiance, Nicholas Scott Greenlee.
The one and only.
The one and only. And with me today are my two co-hosts, Dane and Taylor.
Hi and stuff.
Yes, hello.
Yeah. Oh, we just spent like 20 minutes troubleshooting things, so we're just ready to rip and tear.
There is going to be no standard intro. Get your head out of your ass. We're jumping in.
Yeah. Speaking of, that kind of ties in today's topic, which is like how to make a good podcast, which was Taylor. That was a topic that you wanted to talk about. So why do you want to talk about that?
Well, first of all,
step one, don't do any of this.
Step one, don't be us. Step two. No, but I have come to love podcasting very much as a medium, not only because I've been lucky enough to participate in some, but also I just feel like the podcast space has become so much richer, if that's the word, in the recent years. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about, since the three of us have different experience in podcasting, what we think makes a good podcast.
Yeah. That's definitely something I spent the better part of last year thinking about.
Yeah.
And Dane, I know we've talked a lot about this. Do you have any thoughts right off the bat, my dude?
What makes a good podcast? So, in short, what I would say makes for a good podcast is intimacy, actually. Podcasting is really interesting because it is, by and large, you are only going to listen to it by yourself. The audience is a few hundred, a few thousand, any number, right? All the way up to like fucking, I think Joe Rogan's the biggest, right? Like 9 million or some shit.
What a guy.
Yeah. Anyways, we're going to set my feelings about Joe Rogan aside. But it's not actually an audience of that many. It's, like if, let's say your show is 5,000 people listening, that's actually 5,000 audiences of one, most likely. Maybe you might have a couple of people, you might have some people who, listen together in the car or at home, but by and large, it's the thing you listen to while you take your dog on a walk. It's the thing you listen to while you're really bored at work. It's for one person. So the relationship becomes, from the audience perspective, 1-to-1, and so a lot of that ends up being, you want to invite your listener in a lot, as much as you can. And so a lot of that ends up being about like dynamic and, how close the audience gets to feel with people. And there are some podcasts, I think, that get away with being outside of that. And I think those are ones that start as something else and come in, say, like, I listen to the BBC's World News Report, for example, that does not feel that way. That's just a news report. But because they're the BBC, they kind of get to do that.
Yeah.
And so whatever it is, it's, it needs to be honest, it needs to be personal, it needs to be your thing, right? Like it can't be like you can't do something that's not genuine, if that makes sense. You have to make the podcast you need to make. And for some people that's, a very well reported thing, but it's their thing. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah. No, I think your point about intimacy is really like right on, right? Cuz you're literally a voice in someone's ear. Uh I know that from like an advertising business perspective, like podcasting is some of the most lucrative because you're literally telling someone in their ear to go buy something, right? Which is
Yep.
like which is why right now there's a huge boom for podcasts because there's too much money and not enough podcasts, which is quite wild because there's so many podcasts now. And there was back then, like there's always been a lot of podcasts. I think for me, like I, in talking a lot with you, Dane, and having listened to a lot of like great recommendations from you, like the podcast Start With This from the guys that made Welcome to Night Vale, which is a really great podcast if you want to learn how to make a podcast. But like it's this idea that yeah, you're making something bound to a specific medium, and that medium is, at least from like my perspective coming from film, is like one of the cheapest things to produce the highest quality product, right? Like audio and film is often overlooked because it's an afterthought, but it's often like what makes or breaks a movie, and it's one of the cheapest things to get right. It'll save you tons of money if you record your audio clean, and because our ears are more perceptive than our eyes sometimes, it's like, we notice bad audio before we notice good video, right? Or bad video. And so for me, like I come at it with a more like what makes a good podcast is like that melding of like an understanding of like your audience, your frame in which the show exists. Like, is this an hour-long show that you listen to on your commute, or is this a 15-minute show you listen to while you're making a cup of tea? Those are two different shows. And also, like, can you create audio that like sounds pleasant to listen to? Like because I did a podcast back in like 2017, and like we had like the right kind of mic but in the wrong kind of place, and it just made the podcast really hard to listen to, because I wasn't like mixing the audio to like adhere to like radio standards to like meet that sort of like requirement for it to play in a car. And I think that's like another interesting thing, an element to it is like it's very accessible because like almost everyone has like a laptop, a pair of headphones with a microphone, like there's some way to record a podcast and get really nice audio versus like a movie. And so
a DSLR is expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it becomes really accessible in a way. And I think like to your point, what was that, Dane?
Oh no, you finish up because I'll add something. But
yeah. To your point though about like making it for an audience of one, I think that's really important to like think about because yeah, like you're making it for a very specific thing. The more in podcasting, the most like niche you can be is almost better to a certain extent, because then like you can really hone in on what you're trying to do every week, every other week, every month. It's why I think like it's it's why in a weird way like the show that like the Dane and Derek show is such a weird podcast because it's kind of a whatever show. It's in the coveted genre of two dudes talking on a microphone.
Okay, to be fair though, that is Joe Rogan's shtick, right? And he's like a billion-dollar podcast.
Exactly. But
let's not knock the format. It's just, this actually does get to the thing I was going to add though is there's a lot, there's too much money and not enough podcasts, except there are, like you said, there are a lot of podcasts. It's not a
Mhm.
medium I would ever expect to go big in. Um, I've spent 4-ish years doing this now.
Mhm.
Uh, haven't missed a week, and the audience I have is in the hundreds. You know,
Which is heckin' cool.
it is
Yeah.
heckin' cool. It is heckin' cool, but it is not like something I could ever really make money off of.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Right.
I have so deeply enjoyed doing it. Um, but it is only a thing that can be done out of love. You
Mhm.
The podcasts that are meant to make money, like on purpose, not the ones that are just sort of like those random breakout successes. Um, at this point, are like Obama and Bruce Springsteen's podcast, right? They have a celebrity behind it.
Mhm.
Right.
They are coming from a produced place, you know, and so like what I will say about the art form is that it is so accessible, and that's awesome, and everyone should go do it. Um, but as Derek and I have often talked about, what I think makes a successful podcast is not the number of listeners or the
Mhm.
amount of money. What I think is, was it the thing you wanted to make? And if you're, I guess what I'm sort of saying is, um, what makes a good podcast is not you trying to come here to make money or
Yeah.
become famous or be super successful. What makes a good podcast is a good podcast. Um,
Yeah.
because even though podcasts are kind of booming right now, the era of the random podcast becoming gigantic is sort of over.
Yeah, I agree.
There's never going to be another Welcome to Night Vale. There may be other fictional podcasts that have a big reach and all kinds of stuff, but it's never going to be like that again. Um, and I think that
Yeah.
has a lot to do with the fact that the sort of the media market has moved in. You know, like
Yeah.
the Today Show has a podcast. You know, like
Yeah. It
it's
Is the
it's
Today Show
it's
not just a televised podcast? Like
it
Yeah.
super is. But like what I'm kind of getting at is just like the idea that like so many parts of the internet, um the ethos of it that kind of birthed it is no longer the truth, you
Yeah.
know. And while I think we could bemoan that, and maybe we should, um I think it's just sort of important to reckon with the fact that like the podcast scene is not at all what it was,
Mhm.
um even 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
because I started listening to podcasts back in fuck um 2009-ish.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, I started listening to like, because I always liked NPR. Like I loved This American Life and Wait Wait Don't Tell Me. Um but I couldn't, this sounds really silly, but I genuinely couldn't guarantee I would be in the car with my mother at the right time. So the moment I had an iPod and realized that, oh my God, I can listen to these things I love on my schedule, I was like, dope, great, I'm going to do that. And I found other weird podcasts, but they're all gone. They don't
Mm.
really exist anymore. And then I stuck with those for a while, and then in college I dropped off of them, and then I picked up podcasts again when I had a job at the public library where I was shelving books for 8 hours a day, and I needed podcasts.
Something.
Um, I need God. Um, and I found a ton, and that's when I found like that was like I would describe as not quite a sweet spot, but like it was a period right before this boom that Derek's talking about. Um, but after people had really figured out the medium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say
Yeah.
that's about the time I started listening too. Is like 2014 through 16 is when I found like a big bulk of podcasts that,
Yeah.
they either don't make them anymore or are still going strong.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that I think about often is I'm like, you know, there's a million awesome shows out there that I will never find.
For sure. It's
Um,
like books.
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
books, it's like YouTube, like, and honestly, I just kind of love the fact that, like, at least for now, you know, podcasts are still not TV shows, right?
Hmm.
And if you really want to go digging for stuff, all kinds of weird stuff exists out there, and it's awesome, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but I also think, kind of getting back to the actual topic at hand, the other thing that makes a good podcast is understanding the medium, though.
Yeah.
Like, the reason Welcome to Night Vale worked so well is the fact that it's a fictional radio show that works perfect for an audio medium. Another pretty good show called EOS 10, which had stellar writing. It's Scrubs in Space. Um,
Huh.
really, really funny, really good. The trouble is, it's Scrubs in Space, um, which would work a lot better if we could see what's happening. There's a
Yeah.
lot of moments in which there's like spaceship noises, and I'm like, yeah, but like it's very weird because it's like, but where is it's like it has the same problem that old time audio dramas often have, which is like um
Horses. Okay.
clippity cloppity clop clop. It's like, okay, all right, cool, sure,
Yeah.
horses. Um and so it doesn't, it falls just a little bit flatter than, say, Welcome to Night Vale does, for that
Mhm.
reason. Um and so, like, really knowing the medium, I think, is super important. Um yeah. But I
Yeah.
talked a lot, sorry. This happens.
Welcome to the Dane and Derek Show.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, to that point, like studying the medium, like I remember when everyone started a podcast mid 2020.
Yeah.
Um
I mean, what else did you do?
exactly. I just remember that, like, Dane, like we talked about what a podcast or audio drama would look like for a good like 6 months after everybody else. And I remember I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time listening to other podcasts like the coveted genre of two dudes talking on a microphone. um,
Yep.
in addition
Pinnacle.
to like other kinds of things, like I was interested in doing like a radio drama, like a Wolf 359 or
Mhm.
like Albus Salix or something like that. Uh, and and then like like both you and I, and all three of us have worked on actual play shows, which I think are really interesting. Kind of split the difference of like people hanging out and narrative drama on in a
Mhm.
podcast format. Like,
Mhm.
I think the first podcast I ever listened to was Acquisitions Incorporated from Penny Arcade back in
Yeah.
like 2009 2010, and at the time I was like on the internet looking for D&D like fan films or something like that,
Hmm.
like, and I was like, what is this? Like, why are they just
Yeah.
talking and playing D&D on a microphone? This is so strange. And then of course like Adventure Zone and Friends at the Table and Critical Role all pop off like
Oh,
five
yeah.
Yeah.
years later. But it's like a really, it's an interesting like medium in terms of like how you can reel people in from on a technical level, even like through using stereo or different voice effects or
Mhm.
stuff like that to kind of
Mhm.
craft like a story. um but yeah, it's like understanding the medium is important with anything really, like taking that time to really immerse yourself in it before taking a stab at it, I think is important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it when a podcast really gets its deal. Um
Mhm.
and in those moments I'm always just like, I'm always excited, you know. Um, and truth be told, I listen to mostly interview shows and um news through my podcast these days, which has just been kind of the unfortunate downside of doing level one and then diceology has been that because I do the editing, I don't
Mhm.
have like the space in my brain to listen to other people's actual play shows,
For sure.
um, which has been kind of sad for me and a recent realization. I was like, why don't I listen to these anymore? And I'm like, because I make them. I do this. Like
Yeah.
it's too much. But at the same time, um, in retrospect, I think about like the amount I listened to beforehand before I started. But I do miss the medium, and I kind of want to try and find a way to get back around to that. But yeah, I like Alice Isn't Dead is maybe the one that I think about the
Mm,
most as really as far as an audio drama on podcast form that super got it.
Mm.
Um, and it's through the medium of like trucker radios, and so like they could do like the clicking sound, and have the static and have a lot of atmosphere, um, while having it be an audio medium, right? Like, and so I really dug that. Or yeah, that one really got me. But yeah, I
yeah.
kind of circling back around to the intimacy thing. Derek, you brought up friends at the table, and I remember I once described them to my partner Gracie as they're my best friends I've never met.
Mm,
Um,
That feels so good in its own
yeah,
way.
and I'm like, that's what really will make a podcast stick, or not.
yeah.
Um,
100%. Which,
so, oh, sorry, Derek.
oh no, I was going to ask Taylor a question, unless you had a question for Taylor.
No,
Okay,
you go.
I will go. So, Taylor, since you wanted to talk about how to make a good podcast, does this mean you're going to be starting a podcast?
Wow. So, yes and no.
Yes and
I
no.
I have an idea for one, for sure. Um, when I think about the podcasts that I listen to consistently, it's a lot of, yeah, like two dudes at their microphone talking about stuff, but it's also a lot of just like storytelling in general and like postulating and people who may not be like world renowned experts in something, but either just through experience or study, just have a lot to say about something. And I had an idea. I actually had two ideas for a podcast. I had one for just me by myself, where I had the idea of just thinking some thoughts and just literally bringing whatever thoughts I've been thinking lately to a podcast format because I'm a very, very good tangential talker. That's something I've very much learned about myself in trying to do like YouTube and other stuff like that. But another one about for Nick and I, because, you know, we think about our future and kids are definitely in our future. And we thought it would be a really interesting diary slash experiment when that time does come to be able to have like designated date night, but in podcast format. Like I've watched Colleen Ballinger on YouTube for several years, and she has a podcast with her husband that I love because it is absolutely unhinged. It's literally just whatever they need to talk about at any given moment, but it's them just like authentically being themselves. So like, yeah, that's technically not the best podcast format, especially if you're just like a casual person dropping in. But for people like me who have followed her for a long time, it's amazing. It's the best. And I thought it'd be super fun if in a couple years, like Nick and I could have that opportunity together. And he was like, hell yeah, that sounds so that sounds so fun. But yeah, like I don't know, like I think
Yeah.
that as long as a person can have the confidence to not really over explain what they're podcasting about or like justify it, and just like drop into the space that they're creating and inviting people to come into. I think that's what would make a good podcast. And like that's what I would like to do in a podcast. But to overall answer your question, I would love to do one. I would just have to figure
Yeah.
it out a little bit more.
I mean, I
Mhm.
think you've got two really great concepts right there and then,
Yeah.
you know? Like even if like you were just podcasting with Nick and there weren't like and it wasn't like a diary of the designated date night, which is a great title. Um
Ooh, that is a
uh,
good title. Oh my lord.
uh that's like half the battle sometimes.
For real.
But like, you know, I would listen to you and Nick just chat on a mic. Heck, I would listen to you just chat solo. Like I discovered like the niche genre of daily podcasts, which are like 5 to
Daily.
15-minute podcasts. Yeah, every
Mhm.
day. Usually like it's like a diary entry, a piece of poetry, or like
Yep.
a
Mm.
bit of something someone's learned. Like MX Tune has one. If you've listened to
Yeah.
Oh.
her music. Yeah.
I fucking
It's
love her music.
yeah. Yeah. Her music's great, but she has also a really great podcast, and it's
She
wild.
does.
It's every day. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, it's like that's a space you can be in, and like we were talking, like intimacy is key, right? Like
For sure.
because if you know like in a lot in both these ideas you've laid out exactly what makes it intimate, why you want to
Mhm.
do it, and where you see it going. And that was honestly kind of like what Dane and I thought a lot about when or I guess we didn't really think that much about it, but we had that going into the show. Like when
Yeah.
like when we came up with the show or the pitch for it, it was basically like we don't talk often enough, we want to talk more, we talk about a lot of things that maybe like other people would want to listen to.
Yeah.
And that was like great, okay, like it can be whatever it needs to be, but that's it. um
Yeah.
and it's really for us, and I think that that's like in a lot of ways like podcasting is one of those mediums where it really can be about like it can be for like it is for an audience, but
Mhm.
there's a lot more focus on the sustainability from an artist's perspective, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is definitely a medium that like you have that liberty to just post like a 1-minute voice memo from your phone and just be like, "Hey, no episode this week, but here's what's coming," or just anything along those lines. And
Yeah.
like it's totally valid. And like you're still posting consistently. Like I think honestly the only like metric or like in with podcasts is consistency, but even then I listen to stuff where they took like 6-month breaks and it like doesn't ruin any magic either. It's just such a like lenient art form.
It is.
Yeah.
I will also say it has an odd quality to it in which most art forms I think lean towards the creative side, and by creative I
Mm,
mean uh fictitious. Um
yeah.
as in like writing really leans towards writing stories and poetry.
Hmm.
And and like film does too. Like, don't get me wrong, basically every medium has like a fiction and nonfiction side to it, of
Yeah.
course. um I find podcasting to be very interesting because I actually think it leans towards the nonfiction side far
Totally.
more than it
Yeah.
does towards the more fictitious stuff. Because the thing is, like, for example, Taylor, we with level one,
Hmm.
I actually think technically that's not a narrative podcast, because
No,
what it
not really.
really is it's the podcast of us playing games together,
Yeah.
right?
Like us as
There's
friends.
yes, a story is told there,
Hmm.
um but the podcast itself is not the story.
Yes.
If it was, it would be scripted, right? Like, that's
Hmm.
but what the podcast was us. Um and I just think that's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that the medium leans so far. Like, it's like most mediums I find are either lean a little bit more towards fiction or are pretty even split. Um
Hmm.
and podcast doesn't do that. I can't really think of another one that does, other than say radio. But podcasting on some level is just the evolution of radio, if you ask me.
Yeah, it for
Radio.
sure is.
Yeah. That is a great point. I think leaning into that, because like we've talked about a handful of times, it's an intimate, in your ear, personal experience where you're probably listening for both fiction and nonfiction purposes,
Mm-hmm.
and or at least you're listening to nonfiction, and the fiction of it is them being in the same space as you. I don't know. It's interesting.
Sort of.
Yeah, I think that's really it. It is kind of a strange. It is strange in some ways, and I'm sure at some point we'll crack the science for why podcasting leans a certain way. Just kind of how like they cracked the science for lo-fi hip hop beats.
Um,
Um,
I think if I were to make a guess, it has something to do with the repeatability,
Mm-hmm.
the way in which, and this is true for radio as well. Um, the way in which we expect to consume podcasts is on a very regular basis, and to be fair, a regular basis on which almost no other mediums operate. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the only one I can think of is manga operates on a similar time frame, and the horror stories about that working under that pressure is, anyways. Um, it is very hard to put out fiction at that rate.
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and so, but it is much easier to do something from life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to go with that, to tie it into radio, radio also had the other disadvantage of being live, meaning you couldn't repeat it. And if
Yeah.
you missed a piece of the story, you missed a piece of the story basically at that time. Um, so fiction basically just didn't work. Unless it was sort of like Prairie Home Companion, where it was kind of skits or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I think podcasting's in the same boat because people don't really want the most successful podcasts are regular. They rarely do like big season breaks,
Yeah.
yeah.
unless they're limited run series. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it lends itself to that in a very different way. Whereas like with TV, we expect a season and then to wait a while for the next one. Or same
Mm-hmm.
with like uh films are expected to either be self-contained or we'll wait for the sequel and it's fine. You know, it's which is just very it's just very different what the expectation is.
Yeah.
So that's just my theory of it. Um
Yeah.
Gotta admit though, there is some magic to live radio. Just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
Having done
watching
that.
live theater or a magic
Yeah.
show.
Oh, I sometimes really miss being a radio DJ. It's
Yeah.
it was really fun.
I feel like that's one of those things that, like, if the opportunity, that is a question. If the opportunity ever came back for you to become a radio DJ again, would you?
As long as I just had to be the DJ, yeah. Cool. Um,
There we go.
Becoming music director and all that at that station ended up being too much for me.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, but yeah, the just coming in and doing a show once a week, that shit was fucking great. Loved doing that. Especially at that
Nice.
station. The station I was at was just so weird and indie that like their rule was if you can hear it on like a top 100 station, we don't play it, but otherwise, fuck it, do it.
Hiss.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Hmm.
so that
Well,
was
cool.
awesome. Loved that. But
Yeah. Okay, so we should probably start wrapping it up. But before we do,
Hmm.
mm,
everybody pitch me your wildest, dumbest, funnest. Like, if you could just do it with no consequences, podcast idea.
Oh man.
oh,
Oh dear.
oh, give me
I'll
a
give you
second.
mine.
Okay, do it.
I'd do an underwater podcast,
Oh,
completely
oh,
underwater with using underwater microphones, and it'd just be like deep sea divers talking about fish underwater. That's what I'd do.
huh. All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
Visual
Yeah.
component or no?
No visual component. Underwater. Um, Alternatively, I would do a podcast that that reviews every single episode of Power Rangers. Only
Ah.
problem is that podcast already exists.
Oh, no shit. Really?
So,
Oh,
yeah,
of
so I can't
course.
do
There's
that one.
no doubt.
Yeah. What about you two?
Taylor,
I'm
you
trying to
good?
dig deep and get weird here.
Okay, I'll go. I've roughly got it. Okay, so this
Do the thing.
isn't like all that like bonkers or anything. Um, but I want to do a podcast where I recorded on the move. Um,
Hmm.
so like a hiking podcast, but not really like about the hike, but just like with somebody. You know, basically what I'm saying is the Dane and Derek show, but on a trail.
Yeah.
Neat.
Which we have loose plans. I've been trying to figure out a way to record that.
Hey, you let me know when you figure it out.
Labs.
Yeah. Yeah, a hike, a podcast on a move. That's fun because you get all those weird little sounds, like especially if it's like if it's on a hike, there's like all the little animal sounds. But if you're like walking through like a downtown, it's like cafes opening doors, people talking on their Blackberries that don't exist anymore.
I was like,
You know.
hello?
It's like I
People
haven't.
talking with their
Yeah. Oh, but I will say I almost did that for I think Diceology, but the idea originally came for me back when we were doing level 1, which was there are a couple of games out there like role-playing games about driving, about road trips,
Huh.
and I still have my adapter that plugs into a car that turns into a like a just like a normal outlet for from back when I did documentaries. Um and so I was like, I could set up in the car. We could do a driving
A road
like we
trip
could do the
cast.
road, but I was like, but somebody would have to drive. And I don't think someone should role play and drive at the same time. And I just couldn't figure it out. So I have had this whole like on the move audio for a long time in my head.
I think I know a game we could play. We could talk about it off mic.
Tight.
Taylor, what's yours?
Okay. I think I would do with a visual component, a like some type of strange hybrid between ASMR and like true crime, where you tell spooky true crime stories like in a forest, but ASMR style.
Oh God!
Wow. All right.
And
Yeah.
just call it Shivers.
That's
Ah,
great. That's
that's
great, but
great.
I
You
want
should
no part
actually
in it.
do this.
Um,
Yeah, I don't. We can't help you, but we'll
We
plug the
won't help
show.
you.
We will plug the
I
hell out of that show.
great. I won't listen to it either. I get spooked easily.
I'll forget
Yeah.
it exists, in fact.
That's like literally how
And
you'll
we're
test if it's a good
pressing
episode.
in 3, 2, 1. What were we talking about?
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Who knows? Who
Oh.
knows?
Ugh. Well, with that, dear listeners, thank you so much for joining
Sweet
us this
dreams.
week. Sweet dreams. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Taylor, for being on the show again. We really
Of
love having
course.
you. We'll hopefully get you again soon
Yeah.
or in the future. This has been a blast.
Less than half.
Yeah. Taylor, where can we find you on the internet?
I'm going to go ahead and plug my YouTube. It is 28, like the number, Taylor Ann. And up there, I've got quite a lot of videos from several years, but I will be uploading more very soon.
Yay.
Huzzah.
And Dane, where can people find your stuff?
You can go to danewrites.com. I just posted a piece of fiction, a piece of science fiction, mecha fiction, that I enjoy. So go check that out.
Do it.
Also, oh Jesus, I have a million things. There's also Diceology. It's all on the same website. So you can find my music there and stuff too. Derek.
Yeah. You can go to my website, Benig-Aiello.com. It's got links to everything. Podcasts, this show, some movies. Yeah. I don't really post YouTube videos anymore, or Vimeo videos, or Instagram videos, or TikToks. But I do occasionally make the cinema.
You sure do.
I drink that cinema. But right now we're here slurping down podcasts. God, that got weird.
Yeah, let's go overhead.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so
bye everyone. Wait,
yeah, if anybody's still here, the topic was what to do for a podcast. None of that.
None of that. All right, we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Okay, bye.